We will now be joined online by Professor Dr. Shamita, Vice Principal, Institute of Environment, Education and Research, Bhartiya Vidyapeeth University. Dr. Shamita has several years of research and teaching experience in landscape ecology, conservation biology, environment impact assessment, remote sensing, digital image processing, spatial analysis, environment education, and conservation through the legal system and policy analysis. She has been involved with the expert committee on capacity building for geospatial technologies of the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India. Over to you, Dr. Shamita.
Thank you very much. Namaste, good afternoon. At the outset, let me express my pleasure at being here, especially in the hybrid mode, so that we can share our experiences of working with geospatial capacity building. I'm just going to share my screen. I hope the screen is visible to all. Yeah, well, I'm assuming it is visible to all.
Yeah, it's visible.
Thank you. So capacity building is, one of the key verticals in any of the sectors that we work with. And I've been working in the environmental sector for a very long time. And by virtue of working in that sector, we realized the need for geospatial technologies, and we started working with this over 20 years ago. But what I find is very often capacity building is, relegated to the last session in any meeting or any conference, wherever you go, or it's sort of concised into a single training program or, doing a workshop. But it's much more than that. And in this respect, I'd really like to make a point of what the Aichi targets for biodiversity is, where they put education as the target number one. And once you do that, the elephant is no longer in the room, and it frees up space for a lot of other things as well. So to this talk today, I'd like to go through what India's geospatial capacity building scenario is over the last 10 years and how it's developed and what we need to do. So I'm going to use this particular figure that Dr. Datta referred to, which is taken from the Geospatial Task Force report from 2013, where this really path-breaking report for the first time highlighted, what is available and what is needed, at the national level. Today, if I, try to extrapolate this a little further, especially at the top of the pyramid, we have about 36 universities. That's only 22% of Indian universities that offer doctoral programs in geospatial technologies. And I'm sure the gap pretty much, has remained the same in terms of what is available and what is needed. So if you look at BTech programs, that Professor Lohani spoke about, a quick internet search, showed that there are about 5 universities really offering BTech programs in geospatial technologies. We have about 79 universities offering master's programs, which is really a fraction, of what we really need. And of course, there are papers, special papers offered in, several undergraduate courses, across the country. I really like this figure that Mathurji, put forth in his presentation. So if you look at these two diagrams, which are probably 8 years apart, you see a big gap in what is considered to be the bottom of the pyramid. And I think this itself highlights the dire need for really overvamping the academic curricula. So what the industry needs is, completely different. And what the universities offer is another set of skills. So when we look at capacity building, which is a very complex and intertwined term, I would say, and goes beyond just, a training workshop. It's much more than that. So I would categorize capacity building, at 3 levels. The first being the systemic level, which is the overall policy framework. And fortunately for us, the last 2 or 3 years have seen huge developments in this area, where we have the new geospatial policy, which is really path-breaking, the drone policy and other kinds of supporting bills, which are really liberalizing the geospatial sector. So once you have such a systemic sort of environment in place, this in turn fosters individual capacity building. And this can easily be achieved through, workshops and summer schools and winter schools and a lot of academic programs. And it's only when these two begin to interact with each other that we have capacity which is built within the institutional level. So the systemic framework, it fosters the development of policies at the institutional level, clearing the environment for uptake of geospatial technologies. And then the individuals who have the capacity, find that they are able to work very well. So there's a very close interactions between all of these three levels of capacity building. And therefore, when we look at capacity building, as some of the speakers before me have addressed, we need to address this at all three levels, very, very consciously. Fortunately for us, we live in very interesting times. And you might think, what's interesting sitting in a room full of mass people, out there, but there we are in interesting times. And if you look at the first part of this interesting journey is this whole program of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the geospatial policies, the Digital India programs, which are really enabling the capacity building at the organizational level. And I'd like to use some of the things that Mathurji said, bringing in a value perception. So the value of geospatial technology is really highlighted through the Digital India program. So I think these are really game changers, and especially when you look at what the new geospatial policy says. And to me, what's important here from this policy is these words of democratization of geospatial data, especially in the academic sector. If we need innovation, there is a need for students to access data at different granular resolutions. Empowering citizens, another key aspect, which the bill talks about, which I think is very exciting. Strengthening geospatial infrastructure, advancing entrepreneurship, standardization and certification of courses and skill sets, and catching them young. So I think if you look at these key words, it pretty much sums why we live in interesting times. The second turning point is the national education policy, which is really quite far-sighted, that brings in internships as early as class 6. It also focuses on breaking down the silos between arts and science. I think that really paves the way for the development of new knowledge through this interdisciplinary approach, which has these very important keywords, as I think I mentioned, which is democratization of geospatial data, empowering citizens, strengthening geospatial infrastructure, advancement of entrepreneurship, standardization of courses and skill sets, and catching them young. And to the last point, I think we come to another turning point, which is the national education policy. By virtue of its very nature, it brings in interdisciplinary learning and also introduces internships as early as class 6. So I think this is one of the things that really makes it interesting. And the third is the SDG goals. So with the huge data requirements and now the recognition that both structured, unstructured data, Earth observation data from both data centers, citizen scientists, and people at large, emphasizing on partnerships is another turning point. And this is why I feel that we really live in interesting times, especially for those of us who are working with the geospatial capacity building sector. So while Dr. Datta gave an overview of the programs that we are running through the Department of Science and Technology in terms of summer and winter schools, this is a new program that was initiated this year, which is on geospatial innovation. So 8 such programs are being run across the country. And the goal of these programs is to highlight innovative ideas, that could be used as a bank for development of further programs. So this is, I think, something which really fits when we speak of bringing in a systemic change through individual capacity building. Taking it a little further and understanding that we really need to catch people young, a point that was highlighted both by Mathurji and Professor Lohani. We've decided to leverage the existing strengths that DST's geospatial capacity building program has, with its portal and having trained more than 5,000 people across the country, and setting up a Geospatial for Schools program. NCRT initiated a program much early in the day, but it's not really caught up in the manner that it needs to. So along with what we have with the NCRT, what we've done is started initiating and talking to schools across the country, getting them involved in taking up what we call as change projects for localizing the SDGs through the use of geospatial technologies. And in this process, we'd like to use our participants as mentors, mentoring the schools, building an entire network across the country, showcasing, what schools can do, and also generating this kind of interest with students who possibly contribute to the future workforce of our country. So over a period of a weekend, we sat with Dr. Datta and developed a kind of a roadmap, which I think is very relevant, tying up all the points that the two earlier speakers spoke about. This is my second last slide. So the first one here, the green block, it talks about, the geospatial science part, which is the key, as you see here, which is standardization of curriculum and faculty development. The second part is the innovations that one needs to bring and foster in geospatial technology. The third is, within community and applications. And the fourth is in entrepreneurship. So if you look at the geospatial capacity building chain, this is what we need all throughout the geospatial capacity building chain. And there are many, many actors, in this entire process. So at each level, we also identified, what could be done. And as Professor Lohani said, it's up to all of us, to take charge. But I think overarching, there needs to be a kind of a overarching policy or overarching agency, that can really facilitate and catalyze this. So setting up firstly an accreditation board, which accreditates standardized courses, looking at incorporating geospatial technologies into the workflow of organizations. I think something which is really happening through Digital India and the new geospatial policy. Very strongly fostering academia industry partnerships. And again, here the earlier speakers have highlighted this, but I would highlight another program of the UGC, which is called as the Atal Innovation Labs. I think we really need to bring these various spaces that we have, together, pull them together and say, okay, can we really structure a program? Through the DST, we've opened up the training program to civil society, Dr. Datta being the head of SEED. And let me tell you, it's extremely difficult to get NGOs on board to understand the value of geospatial technologies. When I talk to PIs across the country, they say, madam, we've spoken to NGOs and, they feel that they have no value for geospatial technologies. So you see, there's a lot of work that needs to be done here, in terms of the value that geospatial technology can bring, especially to the civil sector. We have a number of forerunners, but it's not really, spread all across the sector. And yes, the most important thing that I think Dr. Sumit Sen also spoke about is setting up these incubation hubs, again, which Professor Lohani, I think, was a forerunner in his department. Taking this further, we said, what are the minute nitty-gritties that are needed? So each of these points that I spoke about in the previous slide, goes down much further, and I'm happy to share this as well to say, okay, what is it that can be done? University level, undergraduate level, specialized institutions, or spreading it all across, geospatial programs at the school level, geospatial programs for, flagship government programs, or geospatial cells within, let's say, municipal corporations, smaller municipalities, training of trainers. So it really ties down everything that, people have spoken about here. And I feel that I may be repeating myself if I, go into that again. But there is a need for building geospatial literacy. So each of the programs, whether they're apathons or hackathons or, mapathons, building innovation hubs, fostering both national and international exchange, supporting student internships, developing a geospatial, specific geospatial, skill council. I think all of these are very important things that can add a lot of value through the geospatial ecosystem. And if I may suggest here, AGI probably is also one of the right organizations to take the lead to tie up all these various agencies together. So while we may need a few specialized institutions, what we also need is mass uptake, across the country, if we really need to leverage these interesting times, that we are living in. I understand it's the last session, the end of the day. Thank you very much for your attention.